This is a day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. It is great to see everybody here. All the wives, well, not all the wives, but several wives are out sick. I count 5 wives. So remember them in your prayers, because we need everybody back. It's been a crazy winter, and traveling and everything else. People being sick, and so trying to figure out what they are. I want to tell you. So, speaking of the animals, what animal would you choose to represent yourself? Do you see yourself as a lion or a lioness? Maybe a tiger or an alligator, or a fighting kangaroo, or the elusive flying killer whale. If we pick an animal to represent ourselves, we're going to pick something big and fierce and mean, and a bear or something like that. That's what I go by, is a red bear. We normally not going to look at it and say, I want to be an ant. I want to be a rock rabbit. That's what that's called, or a rock badger. They're in Africa, okay? You don't pick yourself as a locust or a lizard. Funny story of lizards. We had those that were called chameleons down in Florida, and they're short. They're not that bright, and they don't have the red on them, but that was the closest thing I could find. And my dad told me when he was a kid that he would catch them and kind of tap their mouth back and forth and make them angry, and he'd hold them up and they'd bite his ear. And he walked around with chameleon earrings. That sounds fun. So I caught one day, and I made him mad, and I held him up, and sure enough, he bit my ear. The rest of the story, Dad didn't tell me they have teeth. They got a big U-shaped, teeny tiny little teeth, but it's enough to puncture your ear because they can hang on. And it startled me. I was only like 8 years old when that happened. And it startled me, so I ripped the lizard off. Then I ended up with this big U-shaped tear in my ear. So don't do that, girls. But when we pick ourselves, an animal, we want something big and fierce. We don't want something small and fragile. An ant you can barely even see. But, when we look at the Bible, we see that a lot of people started off small. I'm sure you've heard that the term, good things come in small packages. And that's what Kathy used to always say when we first met and everything, was good things come in, small packages like dynamite. Later I found out that's what she was. But when you look at the Bible, all of the big leaders in the Bible started off small. They started off not wanting to do what God wanted them to do. But they listened to God. Some refused. When you look at Jonah, but they ended up following God, doing what God wanted, and they turned out to be great people. Jesus was even born in a small way, to a poor family, in a manger, The people he chose for his mission would still be considered small people. Fishermen, tax collectors, people that, nobody liked. But God has a way of putting immense value in something small. Proverbs 30, verse 24. This is going to be our theme verses for the next 4 weeks. 4 things on earth are small, but they are exceedingly wise. The value of something does not depend upon its size. The small thing that we will look at today is very small and insignificant. yet we can learn tremendous truth from it. Jesus started out with 12 men that he had handpicked, not because they were well known, but because they were what he wanted. It wasn't because they were big men in society or well off monetarily. No, Jesus chose his close followers who were fishermen and tax collectors, and even though the remaining men's occupations were not listed, we can assume that they too held insignificant jobs. That is what Jesus wanted as followers. But they didn't stay insignificant, did they? No, they grew into great men. Verse 25, the ants are a people not strong, yet they provide their food in the summer. Verse 1 of this chapter tells us that these verses were written by Agur, the son of Jake, the oracle. He was a contemporary of Solomon and was considered wise enough to be included in this book of wisdom. In this text, Agur lists 4 things on earth that are very small, yet despite their size, they are wise. We will study these 4 creatures over the next 4 weeks. We will look into the 4 great characteristics that they kind of represent that we need to follow in Christian living. Agur speaks of the ant and how they prepare for the winter months during the summer. They are prepared for the cold months underground. Agur must not have known about the weaver ant that you see here in the top left-hand corner. They do not burrow underground. They actually burrow in trees, and they get their name weaver ants because, as you can see, they take leaves and bring them together to form their colony, okay? But a weaver ant can carry 100% of its weight, of its size or whatever you call it, in weight, okay? So we'll just say 230 pounds. I can't carry 230 pounds, okay? But the weaver ants can carry 100% of their body weight. The other ones you're probably more familiar with are the leafcutter ants, okay? They can carry 50% of their body weight, okay? So Agur said they're not strong, but at least these 2 ant types are. Proverbs 6, verses 6, 7, and 8. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Think about the ant. Watch the ant, study the ant, so that you can be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler. They do have a queen, but she doesn't bark out orders and tell them what to do. They know what to do, okay? She prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. I cleaned out my truck a little bit, and I found an old fig Newton that hadn't eaten, and it was hard and crusty and everything. And I was going to toss it out the window. I said, no, there are steps that we have that go up to our alleyway. There was an ant bed. I was like, I'm going to set that up there and feed them. And I set it at the top of the steps, and the ant bed is down at the bottom. And I went into the house with something, and I came back out to the truck, and I looked down, and that fig Newton was covered in ants. Just that quick. You know? And they're doing what ants do. This was a heyday of food for them. You know? And, you know, the one little ant went up there and saw it, blew the whistle, called them all up on their cell phone or whatever. Get up here, we've got food. You know, it's going to last us. And I meant to look at it this morning when I came out, but I'm sure it's gone. I don't know. Last night I had to go out to check the ham and the smoker, and our raccoon was back underneath my truck. And so I don't know if he got it or the squirrels got it, but I'm sure it's gone. But the ants, you know, they're going to defend the fig Newton because that's what they do. They know that when the snow hits, their ant bed is going to be covered, you know, in snow, and they're not going to be able to get out to go get food. And that's what we see here. Consider the ways of the ants, you sluggard. This is what you need to be like. You need to consider their ways. Have you ever stood over an anthill and watched their goings and comings? 3 months ago, I think it was, whenever we went down to Wyoming to see the big boy train, we were waiting for the train to leave the station, and I'd taken Ethan and my other grandson, Patrick, and we walked out into this field waiting for the train to leave so we could get pictures of it. And it was a while, so I took Ethan. We were walking around through the brush and all that, and we found an ant bed that looks like this one down here. It's kind of flat, just a little bit of a mound, but the ants are going everywhere. And I tried to get him to stand there and watch it, but, oh, look, there's bones over here, and, whatever. But if you sit there and watch them, you don't see them leaning up against a blade of grass sunbathing. You don't see them over here fighting. You don't see them going over to the local puddle, and having a vacation. They're all constantly working. If you watch the ants coming out of the hole, usually they'll have a grain of dirt, of sand, a little pebble, to where they're building their home, their colony underground, and they're constantly doing that, and so they're pulling the rocks out. But then there's other ones, like I said, that are out looking for food. They're constantly working, constantly doing their job that they need to do. Now, living up here, you probably don't recognize that top right-hand mound. If you live in the southeast, you recognize a fire ant mound. And they get their name, fire ant, because when they bite you, you know it. It's like you took a hot poker and shoved it against your leg, and if you make the mistake of kicking one or stepping into one, sometimes they're flatter and you step into it and you'll sink down. They'll cover your leg, and then somebody blows the whistle and they all bite at once. And it's just like your leg has been set on fire. They're terrible. And I've actually jumped into our lake on the farm before to try to wash them off. And I found out doing this study that fire ants float. And they'll gather together and form their own little boat, and row out, across. So jumping in the water didn't really help. But luckily you don't have fire ants here. Have you ever seen pictures of this? Somebody got the bright idea to pour melted aluminum into an anthill. And it comes up with a beautiful work of art. But you see just how intense their colony is underground. That's where they're pulling the little pebbles and rocks out of, making this. And if you look over here on the left-hand side, you can see how the one little tunnel's going up, and another tunnel's going over to another tunnel, and it's coming up, and it'll be an opening, and that's where they'll store food, or they'll have the babies, or whatever. But that's just totally intricate for this teeny tiny little ant that the Bible, God tells us that we need to look out after. We need to imitate what they do. Did anybody ever have an ant farm growing up? I did. I don't know if they still have them anymore. I meant to look it up, but it's just a little small, I guess maybe about a foot by maybe an inch wide, like this, and it has a plastic farm on the top of it, and you get ants and you put it in there, and they create a colony, and you can watch them go about their business, in the ant farm. But their colony structure and adaptations, the colony makeup, a single colony usually houses a queen, workers, and brood ants that have the larvae, have other ones. There's a specialized area, chambers within the nest that are used for nurseries, food storage areas, and resting areas for the workers. Adaptation. Some species, like army ants, do not build permanent homes, instead create temporary shelters called bivouacs with their own bodies. Okay? And then flooding survival, again, in emergencies, some ants, like the fire ants, can link their bodies together to form floating rafts. So that little teeny tiny ant is not just a nuisance. It's an intelligent animal, and God tells us that we need to imitate that. Now, this is the first story I thought of when I started studying the ants. In the verses prior to this, we read of where Joseph was in prison. And we'd already know, we looked at it last week as far as how his family had thrown him in a well and they sold him into slavery and everything. And so he's in prison. And the king has a dream. And he comes out and tells the Pharaoh what his dream meant. And it was 7 lean cows and 7 fat cows. And it was dealing with, there was going to be 7 fat years of plenty, and that you need to store everything up because there's going to be 7 years of famine that's going to be really, really bad. And so the Pharaoh pushes Joseph up into the second command in Egypt. And so we pick up the story here in Genesis 41, verses 46 through 49, and then we'll drop down to 53 to 57. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly, and he gathered up all the food of these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and put the food in the cities. He put in every city the food from the fields around it, and Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Again, we see this in the ant colony, don't we? To where they're constantly storing things, and that's what we need to do. Continuing on, well, we're going to drop down to verse 53. The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come. As Joseph had said, there was famine in all lands, and in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he says to do." "56. So when the famine had spread over the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt, to Joseph, to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth." Consider the ants, O sluggard. Look at their ways. And we see that in this story of Joseph and how he prepared, because of God, for the famine. The next verse I thought of was in James. James 4, verses 13 through 16. "Come now, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, 'If the Lord wills, we will do this or that.' As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." What are some time management mistakes we make? We have regrets about yesterday. What I did, what I didn't do. Or maybe last month or last year, we regret that. We obsess about today. Oh man, I don't have enough time. I've got to, come into church for 2 hours. I've got to, all this I got to do. I don't know how I'm going to do it. Or we fret about tomorrow. Things you got to do. Or maybe we just live for the moment only. Why not change our attitude and adjust our thinking and put things in place for the future? Okay? Like the ants do. Well, what is it that we must prepare for as a Christian? In James 1, verses 2 through 4. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." We must be ready for temptations and trials. As we studied, Satan is out there, and he's going to be constantly after you, trying to get you to fall. So we need to be ready for that. The next thing we need to do is we must be ready for tribulations. Tribulation is a trouble or affliction of any kind. John 16, verses 31 through 33. Jesus answered them, "Do you now believe? Behold, the hour is coming. Indeed, it has come when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world." You see what Jesus is saying? You need to be ready for these trials and these temptations and these tribulations and all the things that the world's going to throw at you. But like I always say, treat it like water on a duck's back. It doesn't matter. Jesus has taken care of everything. 1 Peter 3, verses 13 through 17. Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. We must be ready to tell others about Jesus the Christ. Be ready to share the gospel with others. Continuing on in verse 16, we read, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for good, or for doing good, than it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. Okay? It doesn't matter what people tell us, what people call us. You know, sticks and stones can, break my bones, but words can never harm me. But too many times we let the words hurt us, and we shouldn't. We should trust in God, because He will take care of us. We must be ready for the second coming of Jesus. 1 Peter 1, verses 13 through 16. Therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as He who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. Since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. That's what we're preparing for, brothers and sisters, is for Jesus to come back. And we need to be ready. If you have Christmas and you got relatives coming in, or you got family coming to visit, or a friend coming to visit, you'll clean your house and get it all ready. Well, we need to be doing more than that for Jesus coming back. We need to make sure that our heart, our spirit, our soul is ready. That we haven't let the devil work his way in. Ants do not wear out. Ants have an agenda. They all have a purpose for that day. They don't just walk around looking for something to do. They have a plan and they see it through. Ants work with what they have been given. And as we have seen in the scriptures, we need to be more like ants. Not that we need to make a human chain across a gorge or something, but it's still they are working together. And that's what we need to do. Galatians 6, verses 9 through 10. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as you have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. Just like the ants, day in and day out, they're doing the same thing, preparing, and that's what we as Christians need to be doing day in and day out, is preparing for Jesus to come back. Don't let yourself wear out in the kingdom. You're preparing yourself for great reward when Christ comes again. We must stir up what God has given us. And then our last verse this morning is 1 Timothy 1, verses 6 through 7. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and of love and of self-control. And we need to remember that, what God has blessed us with: power, love, and self-control. Do not let yourself grow tired of doing God's work. Ants do not waste time complaining. When you knock down the anthill, have you ever done that? I'm sure you have as a kid. Step on an anthill and kick it over or whatever. You come back the next day or two and it's back. You know, they take it in stride and they build it back. Luckily, they're not like a crow where they remember you. Otherwise, they'll hunt you down. One thing Christians must learn to do is just keep at it. God cannot be mocked. Whatever a man sows, he will also reap. What you sow today, you will reap tomorrow. And today, you are reaping what you sowed yesterday. An interesting fact: each colony of ants has their own smell, their own aroma. And so if a foreign ant comes in from another colony, they'll know that it's a foreign ant and they'll kill it. Okay? I'm not saying that that's what we need to do with visitors. You know, we here are very nice to visitors and treat them well and everything. But I just thought that was an interesting fact of ants. So that's one thing of ants we don't want to follow. If there's any way that we can help you this morning in your walk with Christ, let us know. Let us help you. Let us be there for you. You know, if you need help in preparing for tomorrow, for the future, for the second coming of Christ, let us know and let us help you with that. Next week, we're going to look at the rock badger and see what it's all about. If there's any way we can help you, let us know as together we stand and sing.